NASCAR is officially back. This is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, the money stop. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. And Cole, after a long offseason, we had a little bit of a pre-gamer episode before the Clash, which saw Denny Hamlin win, but we have made it officially to NASCAR season. Speed Weeks is here, the Daytona 500. We're going to dig into all of it. And I think I speak for both of us when I say I could not be more excited for NASCAR to start this year.
Absolutely. I mean, between the Netflix docuseries, all these interviews I've been doing for The Republic and Kicking the Tires, making this outline for the money stop, and just the Clash, obviously, enthusiasm is sky high. I think it's going to be an incredible season. There's so many storylines to look out for, and there's a lot of money to be made. That is for damn sure, as we showed prominently last year.
Well, really exciting things happening here on the money stop, as we mentioned again, presented by Kicking the Tires and SharpLink Gaming per BetMGM. And the fact that this is the first episode presents a pretty unique circumstance for us because we get to talk futures bets for the first time in a year. And if you listened to us from the very beginning last year, chances are you probably made out pretty well. We're going to talk some futures bets, drivers who we expect and maybe are predicting will make the championship four. We'll each pick a champion. And then we'll dig into the big race, the Daytona 500, with a little bit less numbers. That's traditionally the way we tend to skew for super speedways, a little bit more of the guts, a little bit more of the vibes going into speed weeks. And obviously a lot of things are going to change from now after the cars hit the track for the duels and qualifying, practice, and everything else. So take everything we have to say for what it's worth, but I think it's important, Cole, as it is speed weeks, for us to start with penny stocks. We're going to call our futures bets penny stocks because if you're new to the show, we like to go with a money theme for all of our segments here, but let's talk long-term bets here, Cole. Champion bets. I'm just going to rattle off a few of the favorites and then a few of the championship four favorites and kind of go from there. But the favorite to win the championship per BetMGM preseason is none other than Kyle Larson at plus 525, and then closely followed by his Hendrick teammate William Byron at plus 625, and then co-favorites at third would be Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott at plus 800. A couple drivers that didn't even make the championship four last year. And when it comes to making the championship four, you have William Byron and Kyle Larson as the only two drivers above even in terms of odds to make the championship four. So I think something I had discussed on our kind of preseason episode before the Clash happened in the Coliseum was, we're not in as uncharted of territory anymore with this next-gen car and this new track configuration and all of the different variables. Obviously, there's a lot of rule changes and car changes, which we'll get to every year, and especially this year. But we do know a lot more this year, I feel, than we did in previous years. And I feel like that makes these futures bets a little bit easier to forecast than it did, say, a year ago or even the year before that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got a good sample size for drivers to potentially become champion. And I think the biggest thing is championship four, and you'll see that reflected in the odds, obviously. Kyle Larson favored to make it at minus 160, William Byron right behind him at minus 110. And then from there, it's a few drivers that are kind of up in the air. But I don't know if we're going to start our penny stock analysis right now, but my personal bet to make the championship four would be Christopher Bell, who's plus 210 to make it. He's made the championship four the past 2 years. He always turns it on at the end of the year. And if you watch the Netflix docuseries, I really liked his confidence and his composure and just how he handles each race weekend. And I think that goes a long way. I think we've seen that in these last couple of years of him being in the Cup Series. And I think that's a really, I would say, a safe bet to make, too, for the championship for Christopher Bell. But talk about champions. For me personally, I think there's too many unknowns with the new bodies for the Fords and the Toyotas, the new Dark Horse and the Camry XSC. I think Kyle Larson is the favorite for a reason. He has a great handle on this sport, this series, and I think he's getting a good handle on this car. We saw a little bit of trouble last year for him. A lot of that was kind of misfortunes that just didn't go his way. But I think Kyle Larson, for sure, is going to be my favorite to win the championship. And if you put, $10 for him to win at plus 525, just stash it away for 36 weeks and see how it plays out. I think it's a pretty good bet to make.
I agree with you on all of those accounts. I feel that for futures bets, like I said, I think it's a little more cut and dry this year than previous years. And for that reason, I'm a fan of Kyle Larson at plus 525 and even William Byron at plus 625 with all the wins that 2014 clicked off last year, and even Denny Hamlin at plus 800. And By the way, in that NASCAR Full Speed docuseries on Netflix, Denny Hamlin kind of felt like was the main character, and you got a real strong glimpse into his life and what a championship would mean to him. But in any event, I feel like that's where the money lies. I don't really see it being a driver far outside of that top five. I mentioned Chase Elliott at plus 800 for the championship. Not a huge fan of Martin Truex Jr. at plus 900, just considering the way that team sputtered down the stretch in the playoffs last year. And if you're wondering, we haven't even said the name of the former champion yet. Ryan Blaney is a co-odds with Christopher Bell and Joey Logano, a two-time champion, at plus 1,100 at the sixth longest odds. That's about as far out as I would consider going. And you've got Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, a couple other former champions that round out the top 10. So I have a hard time seeing it be a driver outside that grouping. But then when you get outside of there, that's when I see maybe some value in drivers to make the championship for. I like how you mentioned Christopher Bell because he may be the safest bet. He made the championship for 2 years in a row. But I think right behind him, I look at a couple guys in Tyler Reddick, Ross Chastain, and I'll even throw Chris Buescher in this mix. The three of them were so strong at certain points last year. I love the way that 17 team finished the season. Obviously, they were one of the strongest teams in the garage the final probably 10 to 15 weeks of the season. Ross Chastain's been in a championship four before. Tyler Reddick was a race away from doing it last year. I think that you think about what that champ four could look like. It's not always the usual suspects. It's not always the top four drivers that are listed on the odds. There's usually one or two wild cards thrown in that mix, and I think it comes from that category of drivers in a Tyler Reddick or a Ross Chastain. You get a little bit deeper in the odds, you find names like Bubba Wallace at plus 1,000 to make the championship four, Daniel Suarez at plus 2,000. Ty Gibbs, though, could be a really good value at plus 575. I know it's only a second season, but as far as the real long shots to make the championship four, that would probably be my favorite one is Ty Gibbs, because I just feel like he's a driver that I don't think he proved anyone wrong or right necessarily last year. I think he had very high expectations a season ago, and he lived up to them in his rookie year. And I think that has kind of taken a little bit of the pressure that was on him off of him this year. And I think he's going to handle that really well. And you think about having a guy like Christopher Bell waiting in the wings as not necessarily waiting in the wings, but as kind of the guy that's, I would say, co-favorites with Denny Hamlin as like kind of the two drivers at the forefront of that Joe Gibbs Racing camp, and Martin Truex Jr. somewhere in the mix. I just feel like Ty Gibbs is almost the one that's waiting in the shadows, and I think he's really going to put the sport on display this year. I have very high expectations for him. But I think I'll probably leave it there, Cole, as far as my favorite futures bets. But let's get into some actual predictions here. Crystal ball. Let's gaze into it here and talk about the championship four, because we actually, 2 seasons ago, 2022, came extremely close to correctly predicting the championship four. And that was actually the season where Kyle Larson was barely outside the top 10. And I actually picked him to be in the championship four, and he ended up being the champion, which was at the time unprecedented, coming off the year outside of the sport. So that's what I mean when I say there could be a wild card in there. But in any event, let's get into it. Gaze into that crystal ball. What does your championship four look like for 2024?
This is such a tough question at this point before the season starts, because there's so many unknowns with drivers like Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, these guys that didn't really put together a full season and had their setbacks. I think my lock for sure is going to be Kyle Larson. I think Denny Hamlin has a really strong run as well to close out this season. Maybe he even becomes the champion. Who knows? You mentioned the tenacity and all that behind the Netflix docuseries. I like what I saw from that team. He's going to be a lot healthier this year. You saw the impact that his shoulder injury had in him all of last year and even part of the year before. And then I like Christopher Bell quite a bit. I mentioned him as being one of my favorite championship four bets at plus 210. I just think that team puts it together so well at the end of the year. And then I loved what you said in your analysis of your championship four odds and predictions. I like Ross Chastain quite a bit to make the championship four as that sort of dark horse, because he made the championship four the year prior in 2022. This past year, he won the damn race. That was the first time that's ever been done under this format for a non-championship four driver to win the race at Phoenix. And I'll tell you what, that team, I know they didn't have a very flashy showing last year, but they are motivated to go out and do it. They proved that to close the year out. And I think that Ross Chastain's a driver that's going to go out there and get it done. And I think he has the skills to do that.
So you said Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Ross Chastain, and Christopher Bell. That's your champ 4, and who's your champion?
Champion, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson. I'll play it safe.
I thought about Kyle Larson. I feel like they are, with good reason, the best bet to be the champion. If I had to put money on it, that might be very well where my money lies. For my championship 4, I'm going to go with 2 dark horses and 2 obvious ones. I got to go with Kyle Larson, and I got to go with William Byron. And I'm going to go with the 24 in 2024 as my champion in William Byron. We kind of saw it with the numerology a couple of years ago with the 22 in 2022 of Joey Logano. And I just think that a lot of what you said about Kyle Larson and Cliff Daniels in that 5 team can very easily be said as well about William Byron and Rudy Fugle in that pairing. It just feels like they have such a strong grip on the sport. And another guy, you got a really good glimpse into the confidence of that group and specifically that driver from the Netflix documentary. And I think I came away from that seeing William Byron as a guy that knows he is going to win a championship. It's not if, it's not we need things to go our way. He knows it's going to happen. And I think this is going to be the year. And he's got the perfect kind of primer to that with what we saw out of that team last year. I'm going to shake things up, though, with my other 2 picks. I mentioned it's not always so cut and dry, and I think that there's going to be at least one Joe Gibbs driver, as there usually is, but I don't think it's going to be the one that you expect. And I showed my cards a little bit early about a driver I have high expectations for this year, and that is Ty Gibbs, who is at plus 575 to make the championship 4. I really think, and I'm going to predict it right now, that 54 team will be in the championship 4 this year. I think that they're going to put the sport on display. I just like the idea a lot of him having that year to learn behind those veterans, a champion in Martin Truex Jr., a guy like Denny Hamlin, and Christopher Bell, who's just a couple years ahead of him and putting a lot of potential chances to win a championship up early in his career. It shows it can be done by that team and a driver that young, and I really feel it can happen. And my other one, another name I've mentioned already, is Tyler Reddick. I'm going to go with 2 Toyotas versus 2 Chevys in the championship 4. Another team in Tyler Reddick that we've seen it time and time again. They've flexed the muscles. We saw it on the road courses, especially last year. I just think that I look at the way the tracks lay out, and I think it can really cater to his skill set. And you can just see by the week, by the year, Tyler Reddick getting so much more comfortable in that 45 car.
I just want to say, first off, I love both those picks. I think Tyler Reddick, he was probably the one guy I would pick that I did not for the championship 4, the one guy on the outside looking in. He's just a tremendous talent, and I think we saw that all of last year, all throughout his career so far, and I think he's going to have a really deep run this year. And as far as Ty Gibbs, I don't think it's as outlandish as people may think it is, but I think he's going to have a really good season too, potentially multi-win season. I'll throw that out there. For me, a long shot, I was thinking about this a couple days ago, actually. I can see Brad Keselowski winning multiple races and making the championship 4. Look at the way Chris Buescher performed last year. I think all the input from the drivers and the teams, it's going to amount to a really good season for this dark horse, and the Toyota Camry XSE as well. So whereas I would think there's going to be some growing pains, I think there's a growing sense of belief among the garage area that there's not going to be this real significant adjustment period. And maybe they're all putting on a good poker face. I don't know, but I just think that Brad Keselowski is due for a really big year. He saw all the successes his team in the 17 team had, and I think he's going to be determined to go out there and get it done. And I think that he's someone that has a really good pulse in the sport, and it's just going to, potentially have a good deep run this year.
Last thing on future bets, Cole, the fun thing about this is you go to all the different sports books online, and they're running all different kinds of specials. And if you go to DraftKings, right now, as of the time recording this, which is prior to the cars hitting the track on Speed Weeks, they've got over-under on race win totals, and there's some really interesting names and potential values here. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit rapid-fire style, just for some of the ones that I see as more interesting based on the question marks with these specific drivers going into the year. And I want to start with probably the biggest question mark of all. A guy that didn't win a single race last year, and granted missed some, is Chase Elliott. And he is over under 2.5 race wins in 2024. Over is plus 120, under is minus 150.
Wow. I could see Chase winning 3 or 4 next year. I'm gonna go over for that one.
I'm going to go over two. Again, I'm not putting a ton of stock into a lost season after the injury and just a lot of things that didn't break his way. How about, you just mentioned Brad Keselowski, over under half a win. So if he wins a race, that's valued at minus 175, which is heavily favored over not winning a race, plus 135.
I think Brad's winning multiple races this year. That they can over on that all day.
And it's too bad that this isn't one of the, at least on DraftKings, it's not one of those that you can kind of move the ticker over to place a bet on him being able to win 1.5 or more races. But maybe they'll institute that at some point. What about his teammate, Chris Buescher, over under 1.5 wins?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Look what we did last year. Yeah, you go.
I'm going to take the under. I just think that team made such good strides towards the end of last year, but I think what you're going to start to see this season potentially is there's going to be other teams in the garage that kind of catch up. I think you tend to see that margin for when a team pulls away, the next season starts, and it's kind of completely tightened once again. And I just think that there's going to be other drivers in the mix, his teammate and team owner Brad Keselowski included. I think he maybe wins one. I don't know about two with all the other drivers that are kind of coming into their own here.
Yeah, I was going to go with one this year. So it was 1.5, you said it was? Over under?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll go under for that.
And they're both minus 115. Couple other pretty interesting ones here. Denny Hamlin, over under 2.5 races. The odds actually favor under, minus 125. If you think he's going to win 3 or more races, that's even money, plus 100.
What? That's a lock. I might actually take that. That's insane. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that one, it seems almost like a typo. So you might want to lock that one in if you're listening to this right now, because there's probably a good chance that line might move to 3.5, which is where the highest total is.
I was going to say 3.5 is what I would expect him over under.
And that's actually the highest driver win total. There are 2 drivers that have an over under of 3.5. And if you could see where these season long predictions are going, it is Kyle Larson and William Byron, both over under 3.5 wins for 2024. William Byron actually favored for the under, minus 175, and plus 135 to go over. Kyle Larson favored to go over at minus 150. And if you think he's going to win 3 races or fewer, that is a plus 120. So those are the 2 drivers that Vegas clearly is heavily favoring and thinks could win 3 or 4 plus races this year.
I'm going to go over for Kyle Larson for sure. And then for William Byron, I think 3.5 is a really good one because I think he's going to win 3 races this year. I just don't know about anything more than that because you got guys like Chase Elliott back, Alex Bowman, and then you mentioned other teams catching up to each other, the following year, plus the unknowns, the Fords and the Toyotas, the new bodies. So, damn. I'm going to go under. I'm going to go with 3 wins this year for William Byron.
Safe to say that's one that you might want to stay off of just because of the indecision there. And also, if you correctly predict he wins 3 or fewer races, it's only a minus 175 playout. So that's one I would say probably want to stay away from unless you feel very confident that there's value in the 4+ wins. We'll go through a couple more here and then get into our Daytona 500 preseason analysis here. How about Ross Chastain, over under 1.5 wins?
Over.
How about Daniel Suarez, over a 0.5 rather? That's at plus 160.
I can see Suarez squeaking one out. I'm not going to bet that, but I think I can see him winning a race this year.
I'll give you one more, a 2-time champion, Joey Logano, coming into the season, probably with a chip on his shoulder after the early playoff exit. Over under 1.5 wins.
Over. That's an easy one.
And the over on that is minus 135. The under is plus 100. So he is favored to have 2 or more wins this year. Again, those are all on DraftKings. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our former champion. He is listed at over under 2.5 wins. And that's an interesting one because a lot of the wins were backloaded for Ryan Blaney last year. They actually have him favored for under 2.5 at minus 125 and even money for 3+ wins, which is plus 100. So I could see that going either way, to be honest. It wasn't a team that was dominant all year, but I just think that the fact they caught their strides at the right time was more so, I think a little bit of it was them getting hot in the momentum aspect, but I think a large part of it was the fact that they really have acclimated themselves well and come into form with this next-gen car and package. And so for that reason, I'm going to say over.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm curious to see how they do with the confidence coming off the championship as well. It'd be an interesting story to follow this year.
Well, there's no better way to back up your confidence than by winning the Super Bowl of motorsports, the crown jewel of NASCAR, the Daytona 500. As we begin Speed Weeks here, Cole, here's what the odds look like pre-qualifying per BetMGM. Co-favorites to win the race, it is a four-way battle between Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, and Denny Hamlin, all listed at plus 1,100. And then with the fifth highest odds, you've got Joey Logano at plus 1,300. So those are the favorites for Vegas. Let's talk about our favorites. Go ahead.
My favorite, as it is every single plate race, it seems, is going to be Brad Keselowski. Coming off a really solid 2023 season, 16 top 10s, 8th overall in the standings, and going for his 15th Daytona 500 attempt, 0 for 14 to this point. But in his career, he does have one win at Daytona, which came all the way back in 2016. But outside of that, we all know BK is one of the best all-time on superspeedways, 7 wins total. He finished second in the last race at Daytona, pushing his teammate Chris Buescher to the win in the regular season finale. And then, can't forget, in 2023, top 5 in 3 superspeedway races with 2 runner-ups as well, and most laps led in the last 2 Daytona 500s, which is a very important stat to note, especially for DFS. Again, want to note the new body and the supposed increased aerodynamic flow for these new Ford Mustang Dark Horses. I think we'll get a better grip on how these cars handle overall when you get to Vegas and Phoenix, the less aerodynamic dependent tracks. But I think for all intents and purposes, you look at Brad Keselowski, what he's done in his career on these style tracks. He is revered as one of the best pushers and best people in the pack. I think Brad Keselowski is always going to be one of, if not the favorite to win these plate races. Again, he is the favorite at plus 1,100. And surprisingly, he is the 7th most expensive driver for DFS at $9,000. I will call that a lock right now.
And one thing I love to do for DFS this week is I just think of the last couple seasons, how good of a pairing as pushers it was between Brad K and Chris Buescher. I like to package them up together. If you're going to pick Brad K for your lineup, especially, I think it would be a bad idea not to with that price. Lock in Chris Buescher too, and then you've got some money to play with because there are some higher price drivers than the both of them. Is Chris Buescher's 8,800. They're very similar in price in daily fantasy this week. But I'm a big fan of Brad's too, and RFK as a whole. You said everything that needed to be said. I think when you look at super speedways the last few years, that's kind of been the team to beat. But it's hard not to think about Team Penske when we go to this Daytona 500, the crown jewel race. And I'm going to choose for my 2 favorites, 2 drivers that are in the Penske stable and 2 that are also in Vegas's top 5. And we just talked about him. How about the defending champion, Ryan Blaney, co-favorite to win the race? He is the 2nd highest priced driver in daily fantasy, which makes me a little bit wary to choose him there, but riding high on confidence, he's out to reassert himself and just kind of establish the fact that, you know, he wasn't a favorite going into the championship last year and did come away with it. But I think that he and that team definitely want to prove that it wasn't just a flash in the pan, and they're here to stay and be a contender for years to come. And why not check off another crown jewel and bucket list item? You got the championship. Why not win a Daytona 500 too? And you think about Ryan Blaney's success at Daytona, finished 8th there in the 500 last year, and won the regular season finale in 2021. And not to mention, he's got the Penske power pushing him between Joey Logano and 2021 Daytona 500 champion Austin Cindric. As for my other favorite, Joey Logano, we're talking about a former Daytona 500 champion in 2015, and kind of on the flip side of the coin from Blaney. Blaney's looking to reassert himself and prove that that wasn't just kind of a flash in the pan. Joey Logano is coming off an extremely disappointing playoff run, and you got to expect they're probably coming in, that 22 team, with a chip on their shoulder, and they're kind of the grizzled veterans of the sport right now and want to get off on a strong start. And you think about Joey Logano, had a 2nd place finish in this race last year to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He also has back-to-back top 5 finishes at Daytona. Prior to that, though, keep in mind he did have 7 straight finishes outside the top 10, so there's maybe a little bit of risk baked in there, but I'm taking a lot of stock in the Penske teammates that he has to push him. He's always had a knack for putting these big races together. He's had the Daytona 500 win, and again, I really think that team's going to come out guns blazing after a disappointing playoff campaign last year.
I love both those drivers. I mean, When I was looking at the drivers you picked, pretty much everyone you picked, from the favorites to sleepers to values, they were all the drivers that I was next in line to pick. And I mean, anytime you go to a plate track, Team Penske is the class of the field, in addition to Brad Keselowski and RFK Racing right now in the Cup Series. Can't say enough good things about those two drivers. We cannot conclude the favorite segment without talking about Denny Hamlin, Mr. 500 himself. Again, he is also a co-favorite for the win at plus 1,100. He is the most expensive driver in DFS at $10,000, but for good reason. Going for his fourth Daytona 500 victory, which last came in 2020. Don't forget, he also got a win in the Clash, and Toyota as a whole led all but 9 laps in that race. I know it's a very different track. It's actually the complete polar opposite, but I think it's an encouraging sign that a track where aerodynamics really don't play a factor, those Toyotas came out and put on a clinic. So I think you look at that, you look what Denny's done in this race at this track, and I think it's going to bode well for him. In going for his fourth Daytona 500 victory, he has not finished higher than 13th in his last 5 Daytona starts. I will say I'm not looking too much into that, only because, the Toyotas really were not pusher-friendly at these plate tracks the last couple years with the next-gen car. Nobody wanted to work with them because they had the rounded noses, they didn't have any teammates, but I think this year they have it all figured out. They really went aerodynamic heavy on this new design, and JGR had a heavy input in that aspect, so I look for Denny Hamlin to be a favorite and a frontrunner once again, as he always is in the 500. And again, I just love seeing his confidence in the Netflix series, his determination, his tenacity, and I think that he is one of the... it's weird to say, but he's a very underrated super speedway racer. I think, guys like Brad Keselowski get a lot of the praise, but Denny Hamlin, ton of these wins, bunch of 500s, really aggressive in the draft. He's always a great contender for the win.
I love all 4 of those Daytona 500 picks, and obviously, same can be said about what you said for my picks. I mean, if I didn't choose those 2 drivers, it would have been Brad K and Denny Hamlin. But we've got to talk sleepers here, Cole. We've talked a lot about the drivers who are front and center by the odds makers. When it comes to sleepers, I'm looking at Bubba Wallace, who also got a lot of runtime in the Netflix docuseries on NASCAR Full Speed on Netflix. Plus 1,800 for the win. 8,500 in daily fantasy, which is the 10th highest odds, and honestly not a bad value in my opinion. He's got 3 second-place finishes at Daytona, and that includes twice in the 500, and he also finished runner-up in back-to-back Daytona races in the end of 2021 and then the 2022 500. So he's always had a knack for super speedways, has the 2021 win at Talladega under his belt. I'm not reading too much further than that. I just think that Bubba Wallace is a team and a driver that is poised for probably the best season of his career in 2024, and he's just had such a great knack for finding his way around these super speedways. And once again, the 3 second-place finishes at Daytona do not go unnoticed by me. I think if there's going to be a surprise winner at this week's race, I completely think it's going to be Bubba Wallace.
1,000,000%. And could it even be considered a surprise if he has those 2 runner-up finishes in the 500? Yeah, I think that he's somebody that I'm very high on as well, especially for this race, but I think the season as well, just, with the new body and all that. Another season under his belt. I think he has a chip on his shoulder, as he always does, but he has a fire under his ass, and I think he's going to go out there and do a really good job this season, but especially in the 500. For me, a more of a gut call than anything is going to be Ross Chastain. I think he's also a very underrated plate racer. He inhibits all the qualities that you need to be successful on these style of tracks, and that's why he's had so much success through all ranks of NASCAR. He's very aggressive, which you need to be. As you might have noticed, Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, also 2 very aggressive drivers on these plate tracks, very successful drivers on these plate tracks. That's a quality you need to win. But you look at what he's done on these tracks. He got the win at Talladega in 2022 in the Cup Series. He has an Xfinity Series win at Daytona, and he finished 9th in this Daytona 500 last year. So I think Ross Chastain is a very under-the-radar pick, a very underrated driver in general on plate tracks, and he is someone that I feel really good about this week. His value for the win is plus 2,500, and his value for DFS is 8,100. And now for my second driver, it's also your second driver. We share some common ground here. Why don't you lead us off with our driver number 3 in the sleepers category?
Yeah, I mean, there's no sense in picking two drivers when we both agree on Chris Buescher, who is valued at plus 1,500 for the win and 8,800 in daily fantasy, which is the eighth highest odds, again, right behind his teammate and car owner Brad Keselowski. Coming off an unbelievable season, I think he was kind of the breakout driver of 2023. I think you could probably say that in some regards. That included a win at Daytona, and he also placed fourth in the Daytona 500. He had the win in the duel 2 seasons ago, finished third at Talladega last year. Big part of that has been Brad Keselowski, so if you expect Brad K to keep the nose clean and run up front, who's been his pusher all through these past couple seasons, it's been Brad Keselowski. So Chris Buescher comes into kind of the catbird seat here. Anytime you have Brad as your sidekick at a super speedway, you have a legitimate shot at the win. I think that the only thing that scares me away from his win odds is, the father time is ticking on Brad Keselowski. That's no secret. And he has been very vocal about the fact he's got that championship. He wants that Daytona 500 win more than anything. And I think that, it's been such a big couple of years kind of putting RFK under his wing and building it up to what it is right now competitively. I feel like if he was in a similar position this year, white flag is out, he's pushing Chris Buescher, I really think he's going to go out and try a lot harder to win the race. And I think if he tries to win the race, he's going to win the race. So I like Chris Buescher a lot. That'd be my only reservation about picking him for the win. But if you want to go with Chris Buescher to finish in the top 3, it's a good value at plus 350. And there's a lot of good values on the prop bets there. But I think the fact that we're both doubling down on Chris Buescher should probably tell you something about where our money might lie this week. Let's go to value picks here, Cole, and there's plenty of value to go around. I'm not going to spend too much time on mine, other than the fact that I'm picking the third of the 3 Penske drivers, Austin Cindric, who you and I watched in person win the Daytona 500 a couple seasons ago. He is valued at plus 3,000 for the win, which seems like a really good value to me. He's also valued at 7,000 in daily fantasy, and for similar reasons to I mentioned with Blaney and Logano, he's got that really great pushing experience. I think you could even argue he isn't that much of a value pick, or at least a long shot, being that he is a former Daytona 500 champion, but I put him under the value picks because I think plus 3,000 is kind of a steal per BetMGM, by the way, but he's also plus 700 to be in the top 3. And I think if you're going to bet any driver for the win, you probably want to lock in their prop bets too in case they're the pusher and not the one being pushed. But I love Austin Cindric. I think, coming off an extremely disappointing year, this is an opportunity for that 2 team to get off on the right foot. And speaking of getting off on the right foot, how about my man, Jimmy Johnson, back in the sport after a short-lived and tragic ending to his 2023 season. A lot of question marks last year. He had never been in the next-gen car. He had limited seat time last year, but I think limited seat time goes a lot longer way than no seat time. You look at his first race in the next-gen car, which was a year ago at the Daytona 500. He was right there at the thick of things before the big one happened. He was running right there inside the top 10, showed his way around, even with that inexperience in this new car under his belt. And now he does have experience. So he's valued at plus 6,000 for the win, driving number 84, looking for win number 84. I love just the idea of it. I know it's a really long shot, but you're talking about a guy who's won 83 races, and you're talking about a guy that is a 7-time champion and the greatest driver in the sport's history. So if he is starting the race, I think he's going to be in the mix for the win, as long as he obviously keeps the car straight. But that can be said about anybody.
Right. Nice values. For my 2 guys, I'm not looking so much for long shots for the race win, but more so for DFS or finishing prop bets like top 5 or top 10, both of which I like a lot for these drivers. First one's going to be Riley Herbst. He is the second least expensive driver at $5,100 for DFS, and I think that might be the best value in the entire field should he make the race, because keep in mind, this is a driver that made 4 starts in Cup last year, all at super speedways, and in half of those, he got top 10s, including 10th in the Daytona 500 last year. He also scored those for 2 different teams, Front Row Motorsports and Rick Ware Racing. So he has experience in the next-gen car with different teams at plate tracks. Also keep in mind, Riley Herbst, he finished his Xfinity campaign so strong last year. Ended the year with 5 straight top 4 finishes, including his first win. Confidence is sky high for that guy. I cannot wait to see how he does this year in the Xfinity Series, but especially in the 500, I think he's going to have a really strong run, a top 10 run for sure, and I think he's proven that he can do that on multiple occasions, obviously. And then for my final driver, how about a throwback here? David Reagan driving the Stage 60 RFK third entry, valued at $6,500 for DFS. He has 2 Cup wins, both at super speedways, one at Daytona back in 2011. His last start in the Cup Series was back in 2022, but he got 2 top 10s and 4 starts, both of which came at Daytona. Keep in mind, he also had a lowest finish of 24th with no wrecks in those 4 starts, all at super speedways. I think that David Reagan is a very smart and savvy choice. Someone who's not going to maybe be very flashy, but he'll give you a shot at a top 10. He's going to keep the nose clean and not get involved in the big one. And he's proven that throughout his career that he's a very, very good plate racer. So I think David Reagan's a really solid bet. And keep in mind, we mentioned the pushers, the Team Penske guys. Well, there's now 3 RFK Fords in this race. Brad Keselowski, David Reagan, Chris Buescher. That is another car of the train to search the front. And I think that he's going to be a great help for any of those 3 cars and win in that race.
I love this pick, and I would be a fan of David Reagan if he was driving in any entry, just from what we've seen from him on super speedways in his career. But you're talking about how much we just finished oozing about the RFK duo of Chris Buescher and Brad Kay, and you add David Reagan into the mix, a guy who has great super speedway instincts. I think that's a really, really good pick and value at $6,500. So we each are going to pick one driver from these tiers. Cole, give me your favorite sleeper, your favorite value, and your favorite of this pairing of 11 drivers here.
Well, favorite's going to be Brad Keselowski for obvious reasons. Very predictable there. Sleeper, I was kind of wrestling with this one, but I do like Ross Chastain quite a bit. I felt it in my gut. I didn't really have any feelings about the 500 until today, and that one feeling was Ross Chastain, so going to go with him for my sleeper. And then value picks got to be David Reagan, just having the RFK Fords on his side, all the speedway experience throughout his career, and just being a very smart and savvy choice, someone who's not going to, bring your point total down from wrecking out of the race. I like him a lot as a value pick.
And I'm going to take Ryan Blaney from the favorites category, our defending champ. I'll take Bubba Wallace as my favorite sleeper of the week, and I'll take Austin Cindric as the value out of those 4 drivers. So it's time to talk a little bit more prop bets, Cole. This will be a little bit different. We like to go into our prop bets here, which we call big money bets, during each of our episodes. We're not necessarily going to do that now because there's still a lot of to be decided on the track before that, with starting positions, with practice, a lot of unknowns. So stay posted on social media for our big money bets. And we've talked a lot about our favorite, top 5 bets, top 3 bets, and just the overall idea that if you're going to pick a driver for the win, I like the idea of also placing money on their top 3 and or top 5 and even top 10 bet, just as kind of an insurance policy, because things can go wrong at super speedways, and you don't want to be SOL if your driver ends up being taken out at the last moment or beaten by 0.02 of a second or something. I think that it's just sound advice for your big money bets to be a reflection of kind of an insurance policy of the drivers you picked for the win. But usually this would be the part of the episode where we talk about head-to-head driver parlays as well, and we're just going to come flat out and say it. This is not the week for it. There's a time and place for the driver head-to-head picks and the parlays of said picks, the head-to-head match bets, but not at a super speedway. So we're going to kind of nix those 2 here, especially considering we compensated for the futures bets, the penny stocks, to start off with here. But one thing we will discuss that we always do near the end of the episode as well is our daily fantasy lineups. We're going to collaborate on one by the end of the week, but I want to try something different here, Cole, because we led off this episode by talking about how Daytona is all about the vibes. It's all about the buzz. And you just mentioned how you got a feeling for the first time this week about Ross Chastain. I want each of us to make a DFS lineup kind of blindly and share them with one another, and then we'll collaborate on one from there. Again, you're not going to want to lock this in until you see where drivers are going to start, because you're going to gain and lose points based on place differential from where they start. But I think this will be a good starting point for us to see where the vibes kind of lie. So what does your DFS lineup look like right now?
So for my lineup, I went with the most expensive driver being one of your favorites, Joey Logano, at $9,200. former champion of this race, two-time champion of the sport, and I just think that he's coming into this season with a big chip on his shoulder, as you said, following a very early exit from the playoffs as the defending champion. My second most expensive driver is going to be my favorite for the win, in Brad Keselowski at $9,000. I think that price is just a lock in itself, but you look at what he's done throughout his career at these types of tracks, his 15th attempt going for this thing. He's just so determined to get it, and he comes so close every single year. He was in position, I believe it was 5 of the 6 Speedway races last year to win all of them. So I think that he's a very safe bet, a very cost-efficient bet. My third most expensive driver is going to be your favorite for the championship in William Byron at $8,700. I think that team is usually very good in the plate tracks. To start his career, had a little bit of trouble here and there, but so he got his first win at Daytona, got a win there at Atlanta as well a couple years ago. So I think that this is a driver that knows how to navigate the draft, and I think that the Hendrick power under the hood is always going to be a positive. He's going to be the one Hendrick guy that I'm actually very high on this week. Kyle Larson's not going to do anything very, very spectacular. I feel like the chance is always there for Chase Elliott, but I think William Byron's a safe Hendrick bet. From there, I got Bubba Wallace at $8,500. Again, you mentioned his stats at Daytona, specifically in the 500. I think that is too good to ignore. For my fifth driver, I've got my sleeper in Ross Chastain at $8,100. And then for my final driver, I'm going to go with David Ragan at $6,500 for all the reasons I mentioned just recently in the value picks category. What do you got, Steven?
It's a really strong lineup, and I think we have 4 common drivers, if I'm looking at this correctly. But I mentioned before, I am anchoring my lineup around a pairing of Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher at $9,000 and $8,800. And I also chose David Ragan at $6,500. So I have got all 3 RFK drivers in there. And where you picked, I also picked Bubba Wallace, by the way. Bubba Wallace at $8,500 was too good to pass up. So I think we have a lot of common drivers there. Where we differentiated was with a lot of money to play with. You went William Byron. I went with Denny Hamlin. I think if you're going to pick any of the sure bets, why not the guy that is the most sure bet in this entire field and the most expensive driver? Denny Hamlin at $10,000 is what I took. And then with my remaining $7,200, I took Michael McDowell, who we have not mentioned at all, but a former Daytona 500 champion. I'm a little surprised we haven't talked about him at all, but it just worked out to where when I picked those first 5 drivers, Michael McDowell somehow was still waiting there for me. So we'll get you a full lineup that we collaborate on by the end of the week. Again, this is something that you don't want to lock them in before you know the starting position, because if you happen to be new to DraftKings Daily Fantasy and the point scoring system, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown. You get plus or minus a point for every position your driver finished from where they started. So say your driver started 10th, finished 8th, you get plus 2 points there. You get plus 0.25 for every lap they lead, plus 0.45 for the fastest lap. So if you're getting a driver that's running up front, they're probably also running the fastest lap. So suffice to say, if you pick a driver that's going to run up front, lead a lot of laps, you're going to compile a lot of points there. And then you get a finishing point for each position in the field with 45 points for the winner, 42 for second, 41 for third, and so on down the list. So you're taking into consideration the fact that a driver that's going to lead a lot of laps, a driver that's going to have a high place differential, a positive place differential, and finishing position. So all things to keep into consideration. Without further ado, Cole, we're each going to pick a winner and a sleeper. Whoever picks first for their winner gets to pick second for their sleeper, and we'll alternate by the week if you're new to the show. But Cole, you're going to go first for the race winner. So what do you got?
Champ gets first pick, right? I mean, I won it by 1 point last year, right? Over the race winner picks and sleepers?
By one race. Because there was one where we didn't make predictions, and I should recap this. We picked for 35. You had the better picks 18 weeks, and I had the better pick 17 weeks. So the champ goes first. And you're the oldest, so.
There we go. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, my race winner, I'm going to make this really quick and easy. Brad Keselowski. I've been preaching on him all episode. I always preach about him when we go to these types of tracks. I just think that it's going to be 15 times the charm. We're all going to see that number 6 in victory lane.
Give me the best buds. I'm going with the defending champion, Ryan Blaney, for the win. Again, high confidence, out there to prove that it was not a fluke the way he won the championship. I think that the Penske cars are so hard to overlook at the Daytona 500, and I think he's going to make the captain proud once again. For my sleeper, I said it early on in the show, I'm going with Bubba Wallace. If it's going to be a driver outside the top 5 in odds, it's going to be Bubba. And I think that team can get off on a strong start. That's my sleeper pick for the win. How about you?
I honestly couldn't believe he was below 15th in the odds for the race win. Anyway, for my sleeper, this is going to be maybe a little bit left field. However, I did mention this driver on another podcast today. Another sort of gut call, but someone who's also very aggressive. I mentioned earlier in the show, you got to be aggressive to have success in these style tracks. How about John Hunter Nemechek? I think I'm very excited to see how that team and that driver does in 2024. And you mentioned Jimmy Johnson's one of your sleepers. I think that whole legacy MC stable is very underrated at these style tracks. You saw Eric Jones and Jimmy Johnson both have really strong runs last year. And I think that's going to pay dividends once again here in the 500.
Make a really good point. Eric Jones, by the way, another guy that I feel has such a good knack for super speedways, and excited to see what that entire stable has in store this year. But we talked about in our preseason episode, if you happen to miss that, we kind of had overarching thoughts about all of the different teams in the garage and kind of where we're at with them, driver, team changes. So if you happen to have missed all the offseason moves, you're definitely going to want to listen to our last episode of the Money Stop, our preseason edition. But that's going to drop the jack on the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, the Money Stop. So we've got a lot for you to digest there. And the best week of the year, at least one of the best weeks of the year, it's just getting started. It is Speed Weeks. We've got qualifying, duels, practice, and the big race to come this week, 2:30 Eastern Time on Sunday. It is going to be a big one, the Daytona 500. Can't wait to see how it all plays out. Before we go, I do want to have some parting words about our social media contest that is currently taking place. And by the time you listen to this, it'll probably have already been determined, and that is our Silver Dollar Award for the top paint scheme in the garage from the 2023 season. We do this every year. We go with a bracket of the top paint schemes from the prior season, have the fans vote on them, and right now it is a dead heat in the final round. It's the 42 of Noah Gragson from last year, the Wendy's paint scheme, going up against the Build Submarines number 6 car for Brad Keselowski, the green and silver one, going head-to-head in the final head-to-head matchup of the bracket for the Silver Dollar Award, which the prior season was won by the Chase Elliott number 9 Hooters night paint scheme that was run at Bristol. So if you happen to be listening to this early enough, go ahead and vote on social media at @the_MoneyStop. Stay posted there for late-breaking updates, vibes, and things that you're going to want to follow before you place your final bets for the big race, the Daytona 500. So for Cole, I'm Steven. For Kicking the Tires, he's Cole, I'm Steven. This has been the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Happy betting, and we'll see you next week.